What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the TCG Empire YouTube channel. Today we are going over Tech Tuesday. If you're new here, you're not sure what this is, it's where we take the deck of the week and talk about some ways in which you can make your matchup better going into the deck of the week. We did take a look at Red-Green Law, so we're going to be looking at some cards from OP03 as well as the Big Mom starter deck to really get an idea. The only reason I'm not using such a large card pool is because with OP03 being so new, there's some new cards that might come out, and everybody really knows the ideas behind set 1 and set 2 counters because Law has kind of been a deck for a while now. So I'm going to take a look at some of the OP03 cards and we're going to talk about them. So the first card for black is Isho. Now Isho is a card that you are playing already, but you might want to maximize your counts of. Just for the aspect that you can get some plays going where you can KO characters with a certain cost, and with Isho, you can actually, give everything -3 during your turn, and also the on play is fantastic as most of the time Law does have a relatively huge hand, and so being able to make them trash 2 cards, it really punishes them for, bouncing cards, going and drawing a bunch of cards. It means that they have to lose at least 2 cards before you do a big attack, and being a 9k swing, it means that you're going to be forcing blocks, which is fantastic. Next we have Kaku. This is good because you can return 2 cards with CP type from the trash to the bottom of the deck, and then up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less is KO'd. So there is a lot of blockers that get played, and Zoro as well, which are 3 drops, so it means that you can KO with the Kaku. And then we have Fukuro. This is just a good blocker because it can't be KO'd by any effects, so if anyone is still playing Vista or anything like that, it really gives you the chance to actually, utilize the fact that it can't be KO'd by effects, so it gives you a guaranteed blocker. And Law tends to set up multiple swings in multiple turns and then have multiple defense turns. So then we also have Wans or Waynes. I have it on here because the on play is great. You can discard a card from your hand, and then if you have a CP leader, you KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less. A lot of their blockers as well as their searchers are going to be 1 drops, so this helps with the aspect of being able to clear the board, because when it comes to Law, they're going to have huge hand advantage, and then they're also going to have board advantage, and you can't focus on both at the same time, so you really need to get rid of their board as fast as possible, because when you do that, it means that they have to play more cards from their hand in order to refill the board, which means that you're kind of gaining the hand advantage back. So it's better to focus on board and then just let the hand advantage kind of play itself out. That's really it for black, though. Again, these are just set 3 cards as well as some of the new starter decks. Yeah, so let's get into blue. There is no real good blue cards for set 3 that really target Law as a whole or what the deck tries to do, mainly because we got Nami support in this. But 3000 Worlds is a super solid card, as during main you can place up to 1 character with a cost of 5 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck, and then the trigger is to place 1 character with a cost of 3 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. This is good because you can get things like the 5-drop Law blocker, you can get things like the Luffy, you can even hit things like Zoro, and anything else that's really under the deck. Their highest cost card is 5, so you can really target anything and put it to the bottom, and having the trigger means that you can hit the blockers or even the Rush Zoro. There's quite a few cards for green, so we'll get into these. The first card being Jin. This is good because the on play, if you have an East Blue leader, you rest 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, so you can really establish attacks to go through, being able to tap their blockers. And then as always we have Craig that kind of pairs with Jin. The on play, you can trash a card from your hand, and then you KO up to 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So this means you can get rid of blockers and kind of control the board. And then the Dawn ×1, it gives it double attack, so if you can do a 9k swing with double attack, it can really kind of detriment Law, because Law will take life, but there's a certain point when they, don't feel as comfortable. And so being able to do aggressive attacks while they're trying to build a board means that you're in a good position. Then we have Kurobi. The on play, again, you can rest 1 of your opponent's characters. It's not as good as Jin, but it is just another thing, and it also does have triggers, so it can actually let you kind of disrupt the board a little bit more, kind of set those blockers sideways, that way you can actually KO them and kind of focus on the board before going for life. Then we have Chew. Chew is on here because the on play, again, you KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 4 or less, and it does have a trigger, so kind of like Kurobi. It's not as good as Craig, but it does have the ability to KO the on play with, you know, a trigger, which means that you can hit things like baby blockers, the Zoros, you can hit Vistas if they're still playing Vistas, or any other 3-drops, so super solid. Then we have Tooth Attack. Now during the main, again, if you have an East Blue type character, you KO one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 3 or less, and then the trigger being that you get to play one character with a cost of 4 or less with trigger from your hand. So this means that you can play the Chew, you can play the Kurobi, so this means that you can, you know, kind of set up more board potential for attackers for the following turn, but also it lets you establish some board control and being able to respond during your opponent's turn and kind of KO their board. Then we have MH5, which is just a 1-drop rest 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less, and then the trigger being a 5 or less. So you really use it for the main because it can let you kind of get through in the end game when they have so many blockers on board. Their blockers are usually 1-drops aside from the 5-drop law, but again, if you hit it off trigger, you can tap it and they can't rebounce it back into play because they do have to change the color that they switch in. So if you can get it off the field, that's great. If you just leave it tapped, that means you can attack. But overall, the main is good because it lets you really kind of establish board control, and you can kind of get attacks through if you need to without having to worry about blockers. Then I also had a neat tech of the 1-2 Django. You rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less, and then one of your characters gains plus 1000. This can kind of help with setting up for lethal. You know, if you play 2 or 3 of these, it means that, you know, you can rest all of their 1-drop blockers, and then you're also getting plus 1000. So you're getting the Dawn commitment as well as being able to rest characters, so it's super solid. And the trigger being to rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less is super solid too. That's it for green. We'll move on to purple. For purple, we have Poly. Again, Poly's in here because the on play isn't the best, but it's not the worst. It is, you know, kind of one of the things that you can do with set 3 that's pretty solid. So the on play 2 Dawn, if you add a Dawn deck, you add a Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active, and then if you have 8 or more Dawn, you KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So it's not the greatest, but it is Dawn ramp, and then it also does allow you to kind of set up some things where you can kind of diminish the board by one character and then go from there. Then we have Rob Lucy. This is in here just so that way, you know, when you're attacking, if you're going for a big swing and they have a 5-drop law blocker, you can use the Dawn -1 to rest the law and then have the attack go through if they don't have anything else. Then we also do have the whole dismantler slash Dawn -1. If your leader's water type 7, you KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2. Again, it just gets rid of blockers. It gets rid of what Law tries to do with building a big board, and board advantage is really what we want to deal with. Then we have Top Knot. Dawn -2, you return one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less to the bottom of their deck. This means that if they have searchers or anything on board, you can put them to the bottom of their deck, which means that they can't really search for them later on in the game. And being able to bounce them, they tend to play less characters than maxing out at 4. So overall, I think it's super safe to play. And then finally for red, we do have Marco. This is a super solid card. Most of their characters are going to have 3000 power or less, except for their big swingers. So the on play means that you do get a body on board that can KO. And then when it's KO'd, you can trash an event, replay it, and it, you know, brings back a character that you might want to deal with. Then we also have Adio. Dawn ×1. When attacking, your opponent can't activate blockers with characters that have 2000 power or less during the battle. This is super solid in the early game before they get the 5-drop law out and things. It means that they can't activate blocker, which means you can try to apply more pressure. Then we have Fire Fist. Again, Fire Fist is self-explanatory. You KO a 5000 as well as a 4000 power or less. So it just helps with the big board disruption. And then the next couple cards I just added in here because as red, they're kind of staples. I know it kind of goes off track of the aspects of just having OP03, but they do kind of go into the mechanics of things. So I wanted to throw them in just because red is so dominant that it might be something that you might want to try. So the first card being from OP02 is Seaquake. If you have a Whitebeard Pirates leader, you KO one of your opponent's characters with 3000 power or less. This means you can gain more board advantage. Same with Jet Pistol, you KO an opponent's character with 6000 power or less, but it does have a trigger in order to activate the main, which can get rid of things like the 5-drop Law. Then we also have the Diablo Jam. This is in here just, endgame lethal scenarios you get through blocker, similar to how the audio is. Then we have Flame Emperor. You get plus 3k buff, you get double attack, and then you also get to KO a character with 8000 power or less, which means you get to KO their recycled characters such as the Law, that's the blocker, the Law that they replay in order to restand a character, and things like that. So next we'll go to yellow. Again, these are just OP03 and starter deck 7 cards. We do have the 10-drop Charlotte Linlin. Max this out. This card is your big sweeper against Law. They're going to have so many blockers in play that you really need to try and rip them of life as much as possible and give yourself life because they're going to have so many swings. Then we have Struzen. I have it in here because the on play is valid. Now you're most of the time going to use it as a 2k counter, but with Struzen, the on play, you can trash a card with trigger, and then you KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less. Then we have Charlotte Cracker. Charlotte Cracker's in here just because you can play it off a trigger. It's a 5k body, and it also threatens double attack, which can put massive amounts of damage. Then I have Zeus and Prometheus from the starter deck. The reason why these are in here is because when you do get the Charlotte Linlin out, you can give it double attack as well as banish, and if they don't have a blocker out or anything like that, that means that when you do this combination, they're not getting those cards in their hand and they're not getting triggers. They're just going directly to the drop, which means that they're not gaining as much momentum as they could. And you can make sure that with rearranging life, that you can actually banish cards that you don't want them to have in their hand. And then in turn, give them cards that they would really not want to have in their hand. And then from the starter deck, we also have Charlotte Mont Dior. I have this in here because the activate main means that you can, if you have to rip a life to yourself and then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less, it's not the best, not the worst, it's just more board control for yellow. Then we have Thunderbolt. Again, you can trash a card from the top of your life and then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So you can get rid of Laws, you can get rid of some of their big attackers because they're not going to attack with baby blockers, and so you can kind of run them out of resources and only really have a board of searchers that can't really do much. And then from OP03 we have Buzzcut Mochi. I have this in here because if there is a situation in which you have less life than your opponent from them blocking so much and you kind of waiting to set up your 10 drops and things like that, you can just KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, and so it's solid. And then we also have Soul Pocus from starter deck 7. This is solid because when it comes to Law, they're going to want as much momentum as possible, but giving them the ability to either trash one of their lives or put a life to the top of yours, it means that they're losing momentum either way. They're either making it to where they have to deal another attack, or they're putting a card that they might want in their hand into the drop. So it means that you're getting through faster, which means that the board presence isn't as stressful at the time. So overall, these are kind of the counters you can go for if you're wanting to try OP03 counters. Nothing special with Law. You just really need to play board control, make them, have to go to as little of a hand size as possible, and then go from there. So as always, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. Otherwise, I will catch you guys in tomorrow's episode of What to Buy Wednesday.